Let's trace some problems from this worksheet. We have two arrays. I'm going to label each array with index positions. And the one array you can see has decimal numbers in it because it's an array of double. And this array up here is an array of integer, so it can only store whole numbers. Okay, the first line of code here, we're calling the function average. We're passing two parameters, 4. The 4 plugs in for the first parameter listed here, num1. The 6 gets passed and plugs in for num2. Let's just put a 4 here and a 6 here to keep track of that. And now, when we execute this function, average, there's only one line of code. Add up num1 plus num2. Take that quantity, which is 10, and divide it by 2, and you get the number 5. And so a 5 gets returned and plugs in for the call statement, and that 5 then plugs in for label 1 text, and there's your answer for number 1. We could have, of course, just added up 4 plus 6 and divided by 2 right here in the body of the form load method, but by having this function, it's reusable, and we could call the variable. We could call this function average many times up here in this private sub n sub. So it's reusable, and that's a big advantage. Okay, exercise number 2. We're calling a function round. We're passing 12.5 as a parameter. The 12.5 plugs in for num1. Notice that in this function, num1 is a double. I used num1 as a parameter name in this function here, but it was only allowed to be whole numbers. Well, in this case, 12.5 is a decimal number, which also can be thought of as a double. So everything's okay, there's no error. And now in the body of this function, round, we are taking 12.5 and we're adding 0.5 to it. So that works out to be 13. And 13 is being floored. So 13 is a whole number, but if there was a 0.1 there, it would be chopped off. And the whole number 13 is returned back up and plugged in here. And look what just happened. 12.5 just got rounded to 13. So any decimal number that you put in here, at least any positive number, that's a decimal number, when passed down here to this reusable function round, it gets rounded. Don't forget there is a built-in math.round method built into Visual Basic, but to use that you have to type math.round. Here, because this is a function that I created and typed out, I just have to type the word round. Moving on, array average and nums. This is again calling a function. Array average has a parameter and nums. This whole array up here, this whole array and nums, this whole set of numbers is passed as a parameter and plugs in for nums down here. And that's perfectly legal to have a variable with one name be passed and plug in for a variable with another name. Now I'm just going to refer to mnums by looking at it up here. I'm not going to rewrite all these numbers on my scratch paper here. I could, but I'm not. I'm just going to be a little bit lazy in that regard. And now let's execute the body of this function array average. Sum is being set equal to 0. J starts at 0. Nums.length minus 1. Let's see what that simplifies to. The length of this array here is 8. 8 minus 1 happens to be 7. So you could cross this out and put a 7 there if you wanted to. And we've already, on a previous worksheet, we saw a function that did this. We're just adding up all of the numbers that are in the array. So I still want you to show the scratch work, but right now we could just discuss that 0 plus 2 plus 30 plus 14, whatever that adds up to, that's the sum. And that sum, I'm not sure what it is. I'm not going to take the time to figure it out, but let's just pretend it's 100. And then on the last line of code here, after the loop finishes, we take that number, let's just pretend it's 100, and we divide it by nums.length. Nums.length is 8, and 100 divided by 8, whatever that number is, it could be like 12 point something. Because this function does return a double, we could get a number like 12.2 or something, could be returned and plug in as the answer here. Now that's not really the answer. Somebody who's just looking at this worksheet, at this video, and doesn't listen to what I'm saying might think that that's the answer. But I'm telling you right now, those of you that are listening closely, you better do the scratch work and figure out what the real answer is. Okay, these last 3 exercises I want you to do on your own, but let's just take a quick look at them. Each of them involve calling a function that's typed out somewhere down below, and each of them pass a parameter or 2. And for these exercises, we're passing this other array named m decimal nums instead of mnums. So this array is used for the next 3 exercises. And what's the purpose of each of these reusable functions? Well, this one here I can see just adds up all the decimal numbers and returns the sum. So you could cheat. You could cheat for this exercise number 4 and just add these up, and that's the answer that you'll have here. But again, I want to see scratch work. For number 5, it doesn't do much more except, it calls this function, array average 2, calls array sum. So whatever array is passed from up above for decimal nums is then passed to this decimal nums. And you can trust that this works. Whatever the sum is of that array gets divided by that array's length. And overall, some average like 12.2, kind of like we pretended was the average up here for this exercise, some number is returned by this function. So the answer here will be the average of all these numbers. It looks like it's going to be the number like 3.1 or something like that. I'm going to put the wrong answer in here, 3.1, and check to see how many people cheat by not listening to this video. Array product. This last exercise that you have to do, it is product, is what you get when you multiply 2 numbers together. So it's taking, taking 2 arrays, which instead of naming them mnums or something, I'm naming the arrays A and B. It's figuring out what the smallest length is of these 2 arrays using the built-in math.min method or function. Well, these 2 arrays, the shortest one is this array, m decimal numbers. So m decimal numbers has a length of 5, and m decimal numbers is what gets passed, because it's the second parameter. It gets passed and it plugs in for B, and the first parameter, A, is mnums. It gets passed and plugs in to this function as A. And I just discussed that the length of that guy is 5. The length of this guy, I think, was like 8. So math.min parentheses 8 comma 5 ends up being 5. And 5 minus 1 here is 4. So this J loop, J, which is over here. J ends up starting at 0. It goes to 1, it goes to 2, it goes to 3, it goes to 4. Officially it goes to 5. But when it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it takes the corresponding numbers from the arrays and multiplies them, and then adds up those products into a grand total. So I'm just going to talk about what the answer should look like. It takes 0 times 1.3, and it adds that to 2 times 4.4, and it adds that to 30 times 2.3, and finally, on the last iteration, it takes, I think it keeps going higher than I thought it was going to go, 15 times 5.1, and it goes one more. It's 26 times, no, I'm sorry, it was 14 times 5.1. This was really a 4, and it ends up taking, adding that to 15, times the number that's in the position 4 here, 3.8. Then it stops because this array ran out of numbers, and these numbers never really get a chance to be multiplied, but that's just the way it happens to work. And whatever that grand total is when you add it up, that's the answer here to number 6. Whatever all this is, question mark, added up, is the answer.